Let me start with a question. Just last month, I was running a workshop on the future of climate response with a community of scientists with their own medical specialties. Now, I asked them a question that I'm asking you now. Will we, as humans, have failed in 2050 if we do not manage to reduce down Earth temperature by 2 degrees? Now, the answer quite naturally, at least naturally to them, yes, we will have failed as humans if we do not manage to reduce down Earth temperature by 2 degrees. Now, I followed up on this question by asking them very simply, will your answer remain the same if we manage to change our behaviors quite permanently, but we do not manage to reduce down Earth temperature by 2 degrees? The reasons behind my follow-up question can be easily understood as simply saying we could be reducing down Earth temperature without changing why we consume, how we consume, or where we locate ourselves as humans in the food chain. So at the end of the day, what actually matters to us the most? Changing figures or changing behaviors? Now, some may argue that quantitative results are one of the base performance indicators that we have to evaluate future behaviors. For example, if you go through a test and you pass that test by, let's say, 90%, you might find it pretty safe to assume that your proficiency, or at least your fluency, has been certified. Now you know, maybe many people like I do, who've become more performant in actually passing the test and knowing instructions by heart than actually mastering a language and its subtleties. So we actually develop people who are basically performant in passing a test, but not speaking a language. Meaning that we've developed a society where evaluation tools dominate, prevail on what they were actually intended to evaluate in the first place. Competency, skill, knowledge of the world at large. Grades have become more important than the skills that we're actually seeking. Figures over behaviors. Now, I work as an anticipation specialist, and some of you might call us futurist. But the way I describe my job is usually just someone who helped design conversation spaces where people, individuals, communities, come together to talk about the future of a topic they care about. Now, what I've noticed over the years is how futures, and the plural is intentional, how futures are amongst the best spaces to actually identify the recurrence of that flaw that I'm talking about. How certification has overpowered substance. When I ask people, what are your probable futures of a particular theme? They usually go for example, the end of illiteracy or the reduction of unemployment. So I'm going to go for basically saying, oh, I bet in 2050, something that is realistic is a figure. 0% illiteracy, 2% unemployment. Now, when I ask them what they aspire to see in 2050, what would be a desirable future? They talk about how they'd like to see people at peace or communicating without any type of language or cultural barriers. So you see what's happening. For probable futures that they can bet on, they'll go for figures. While when we're asking about desirable futures, their aspirations, their desires, they'll go for behaviors. I bet on numbers, but I aspire to see change in behaviors. Now, you might already see why that matters for climate change. as we've been told that the urgency of global warming demands that we go for futures that we can bet on. So no time to wish, no time to hope, no time for behaviors. We use time, or should I say we bend time, to repeat that flaw over and over again. Figures over behaviors, numbers over hope. Now, I don't think we should blame ourselves for doing that, because what it reveals is that we don't know how to evaluate change any other way. If, for example, you ask yourself, has a child grown or matured? How are you going to determine that? Well, what you might do is say, in summer 2020, the child was 1 meter high, and now, 18 months later, the child is 1 meter 20. Well, which is quite a growth spurt. But in that particular case, what you get to see is that it is a fact. Numbers speak. The child has grown by 20 centimeters. But what does it tell you of that child's appreciation of difference? Well, the amount of friends that she has of different race, of different genders, of different everything will tell you that this child will become an adult that is respectable. An adult that does not write hate speech on Facebook, for example. How do you capture behaviors? How do you know that you're on the right path? Now, that's a question that, we're not the first one to ask ourselves, and we have a community of evaluators and scientists who've actually come up with processes and indicators and actually even developed theories of change. But that's not what this example is about. The example of the child's growth is actually a good way for us to see how limited our understanding of ecosystems are. What we get to see is that we're not equipped to actually capture the world around us. And that comes from the very reason why we want to evaluate in the first place. Think about why you might want to evaluate. Evaluate your level of English, the amount of inequalities in Belgium, or who runs the fastest in track and field. When you evaluate, what you're actually trying to do is prove a point of achievement. You want to say to the world, I made it. That's what evaluating for you is about, for most of us is about. We don't think that we could actually use change for any other ways. We don't think that actually evaluating change is not about proving a point to the past. We don't think that evaluating change could be about reinvesting what we know of the past and the present into the future. We're using change to prove that we were right. But if you're using change from this point of arrogance, if you're using change in order to demonstrate that you were right, your very single truth, what happened is you start working in silos. You start working per categories, per specialties, and you don't connect them up together. What you do is that you have an ecosystem, different components, different agents, but you're just going to go for your own little circle. But the worst part is that when we explain it, you get to see why that could be wrong. You get to see that, interconnectedness is actually what the world is about. But common sense in those daily examples doesn't work for us. I remember, for example, as I was walking down Niamey, which is the capital city of Niger, with some friends of mine. And in Niamey, you have a particular road that everybody knows as being quite deadly, which means that on a daily basis, you get people that get hit or run over, and we know about this particular spot. Now, what happened is, what was deemed to play, which is that one day as we're walking by with friends of mine, we see somebody getting hit directly by a car right at this intersection, just because of the design of the road. Now, my friend says, luckily, the hospital is nearby. Now, I do what many millennials will do, so I do a little bit of digging on the internet, and I get to find that in fact those who had gotten the deal for the calls for projects for the hospital were the very same ones who actually affiliated to those who were responsible for the very structure of the road. So, if we get this right, those who were responsible for the disease were the ones tending to the wounds of the ones who were directly affected by that illness to begin with. And this inability to connect things just because you get this deal for a call for projects because you tick the box of health, but you might not tick the box of physical security, or you might not tick the box of gender equality, but somehow you're taking one box, one truth, and that is enough. This replication of a model where we're just being taught how to be right is part of the limitations of the system that we currently live in. So if there's 3 things that I'd like for us to bring home, coming from that example, is first of all, the way we evaluate change matters. But more importantly, more often than not, it traps us. And it's even more dangerous when it's applied to specific cases of ecosystems, maybe development, climate change, or gender equality. Whenever you're actually encountering ecosystems, your response cannot be looking for how to be right. It has to be about more specific understanding of the system at large. Which brings me to my 3rd point. The only way for us to actually tap into the complexity of the worlds that we evolve in requires competencies. It requires dialogues. And embracing complexity, embracing participatory dialogues are the only way forward. As a young person in this society, I've been taught how to be right, how to demonstrate how to be right. But I also get to find that this is not going to be enough. So we come at a moment of truth, where we actually have to pick between being right or understanding the world around us. Now, I've made my choice, and I hope that you'll do yours. I thank you.